And he lives in the state of Washington and has a very geological perspective on things. So the core thing that we promote in ProRate is
Wait, it's just a second. If we're going through introductions or something, you mentioned Tor, but I have something to say about this.
How about we have everyone introduce themselves individually?
No, go right ahead. But I did mention your name. Rich. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned the right thing. Look, if you're still just going through the cycle, you just have a habit of moving on directly into whatever.
Okay.
And
good, Richard. What do you
fix it?
Go ahead
Richard,
and introduce
what you want to
yourself.
say?
yeah, all I mean to say is that I have a remarkably good education on the issues of nuclear and geothermal, and I am happy to get into detail if anybody gives a damn, but I just want to state that I do have something to say on this topic when the right moments come.
Okay, so let me introduce you a little bit. Richard Troy is born in New Orleans, and he is and there's Michael Watson. I'm so glad he's joining us. And he was on the original team that helped promote ProRate Energy, his original idea, rate design. He's been on our team for at least a half a decade or more, and he's on the board of ProRate. And we have a new guest. We have two new guests tonight that have not been on any previous meeting, and that is Michael Watson and Paul Washington. So let me introduce you guys a little bit and then ask you guys to introduce us to us. So Paul Washington is a geologist. He was living in Ruston, Louisiana when I met him. He's since moved to Pennsylvania. And he is a professional geologist, teaches in geology in various universities. Michael Watson, I only heard of him about 3 weeks ago, invited him to join me in a phone call, and we found out we have a lot of common interests. And one of the things I was struck by his contribution, the Electricity Brain Trust, one particular comment he said, I'm paraphrasing, that ratepayers do not like to have their distributed energy resources, batteries, solar panels, consumption devices like water heaters and air conditioners manipulated and controlled by the utility or any aggregator. They don't like it. And then later in the same letter, he wrote, our subsequent letter, he wrote to me, if carbon is the problem, then nuclear power is part of the solution. So anyway, we were going to try to have this meeting last week. Michael didn't show up. Tor did. Tor has a different perspective. He thinks that it's more expensive. I'm sure I'm paraphrasing him wrong, but it's more expensive than nuclear power to solve the problem than using geothermal. And that got us into this conundrum between those two technologies. And so let me let Tor introduce himself shortly, and then Brendan and Richard, so everyone feels like they've had a shot to say who they are.
Good evening. My name is Torrals. I live in the Seattle metro area, and I studied at the University of Colorado under Ted Scambus, of all people. Ruben Zubro, who was Nixon's assistant economic advisor, Eugene McCarthy, who was a failed presidential candidate. I just lucked out. And they all vividly told their theories of the future and how they would play out, and they've been more or less correct. That's 43 years ago.
Okay, Brendan.
Was an industrial engineer and a statistics major. And what I mean evil.
Okay, Brendan.
Hi, I'm Brendan Moore. I've studied at Ohio University, Salzburg University in Austria, University of Cincinnati for a little bit, Tulane University and University of New Orleans. Been in multiple doctorate programs, 4 masters. Most recent doctorate program, I graduated with engineering and applied science, but I also have a background in engineering management, IT management, cybersecurity, environmental engineering in general. And I've been a professor. I'm a professor at Tulane University in graduate as well as undergraduate IT. But I've been a professor for 16 years while working full-time in industry for a long time. And And I'm, you know, Myron, I remember we were talking about ProRate, and I think it was February 2016, but I didn't actually start getting really involved until 2017 or so. And it's been fantastic to see ProRate grow, evolve.
Okay, Richard, would you like to say something about yourself?
You speaking to me, Ron?
Yes.
I had to unmute. Sorry. Yes. Myron got part of it right. Well, the part he said he got right. I'm native of New Orleans, Tulane, blah blah blah. My father, however, worth mentioning, was not only the man that Myron knew, and that's how we met, but before he had his law career, not before he had his law degree, whatever, he was a nuclear physicist. And when I was done with Roger Kipling's spots on, you know, whatever, no, he tried to lull me to sleep by teaching me physics. And instead, it just captured my imagination, and it's been kind of a lifelong thing since I was like 4 years old or something. So while I have followed other sciences, and I've got a little bit more to say about that in just a second, I have been a informal, self-taught, but active student of everything about, you know, the deepest part of physics, nuclear power, and so forth. Moving way forward, I also ended up, you know, briefly a bit at Stanford. I ended up doing 7 years as the lead researcher on a 50-person funded team. I ran the team at UC Berkeley in earth science. And from there, I learned a lot about geothermal, not only because there were people active about that in my team, but also because we have these geysers just up the road here. And I live currently in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so I've been following that fairly closely as well. So I have a broad-based background on both sides of the coin that I think we're supposed to be examining here. And I think, you know, that's enough. That's about me. Thank you.
Okay, Paul, would you like to say something? No, I think we already introduced you. I was trying to talk to Richard Schmidt. Would you like to introduce yourself, Richard?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Richard Schmidt. I'm born and raised in New Orleans. I spent 47 years in the roofing business related to reflectivity on roof surfaces. I formulated material with the help of Raman Haas, chemists, and other chemists unmentionable right now, but I can't tell you their names right off the top of my head. And we came up with a system that was also water resistant, mildew resistant. It gave high heat reflectivity from the different pigments that we added to the formula. And I had help from Orleans Paintworks. I don't think they're in business anymore. They've been in business totally about 100 years in New Orleans up until their recent closure. And they helped me to develop a formula as a roof coating. And we felt good about helping people keep the heat down during the summer months in New Orleans. And that's about all I can say about myself.
Okay. Now we have to cut short the introductions, but we can't leave out Dan Weiner, who arrived a bit late. Go ahead, Dan.
Hi, I'm an architect with an interest in green building science, and utility regulation. That's it. I'm in
Okay.
New Orleans.
And then I was wondering if Michael and Paul could also introduce themselves. Not just, I know you introduced them, but
Yeah, Michael, please.
I'm an engineer by training. Worked in the utility industry for 40 years. Spent 5 years at Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, which is the largest for-service municipal utility, I believe, in the United States. Maybe it's just the Southeast. I don't know.
What's the name of it again?
Memphis Light, Gas, and Water.
Okay.
And I left there and worked at an electric cooperative in southern Middle Tennessee for the next 27 years. Did everything there from junior engineer, system planning. Then I moved into operations where I spent the bulk of my career keeping the lights on, building the system. And the last 5 years, I was the CEO. I retired in 19, and I've been doing consulting and data analytics since.
Okay. Well, I don't know why we are the right team to discuss this, but this is the team we have. Okay, so I just want to say we were going to have this meeting last week. Michael didn't show up. We tried to have it without him. And we were talking about the pros and cons of nuclear. And one question that came up, and I hope I'm paraphrasing this right, was if we're trying to reach stasis at the least cost and at the quickest time, namely the climate stops getting worse, would we be better off putting, besides for the money we're putting in renewables, also put a substantial amount into nuclear? And I think Tor said, no, it's faster and cheaper to do it with geothermal. And then we promised to let him develop that idea tonight. But then something else happened in the interim, and that was a whole new thread started when Norman Wittrell, my partner and an ancillary member of ProRate, got into a conversation with Paul Washington because he heard that geothermal might be a major solution for the future, and Paul gave us an email to explain why that isn't the case. And part of the problem, I should tell you ahead of time, geothermal is being used two different ways in this conversation. Many people, and I am definitely adherent to this opinion, that geothermal ought to be used exclusively for digging holes in the ground to produce heat sufficient to boil water and make steam and make electricity, or some other fluid to do that. However, there are definitely a non-trivial number of people in the world who use geothermal, where I would call it ground coupling, low temperature heating and cooling, by putting heat in the ground in the summer and taking it out in the winter. And that's sometimes called geothermal. So Paul, would you explain what you explained to Norman in a nutshell, and why it is that Tor's right or Norman's right about how you might be able to displace the need for nuclear with geothermal?
I'm not sure that either one's right.
Okay.
Geothermal, there are the two types of geothermal. What I like to call commercial geothermal is using magmatic heat, what I call igneous heat, and I'll call it in that. It's using the heat around an active magmatic system, but even where that's done, the heat is, you're using so much energy, so much heat energy to turn the water into steam. That phase transition is a huge energy sink. And so that you're using a huge amount of the energy and it shuts it down. The standard calculation is that you don't run a geothermal well system, a field in that environment for more than about 25 years. So there's a limited amount available even in one of those systems. It's not a long-term solution. In terms of small, or shall we call it single building geothermal, which is your heat transfer to a non-overheated water in the through using the thermal well of the shallow subsurface. It's basically, that works best between about 35 and 40 degrees north in the United States. You get much north of that, and you are using most of your heat for heating of the building. And if you have too dense a well field that is too dense a population of wells, you start to create a cold zone in the ground because you're using too much of the heat. And if you're down on the Gulf Coast and you have too dense a field, a well field, you start to create a heat island below your buildings. And so both of those, it's only of limited use. It's best used out in rural areas where you've got widely spaced buildings. It's not very useful in urban areas and even suburban areas. It is useful at this point only because there are relatively few of them.
All right.
The amount of heat that you have available isn't that much. You're really it works best when you're trading off, basically using it as a heat battery rather than as a heat source or a cooling source.
Did you want to say something about that tour, that we got it wrong or something?
No, that's largely right. And if referring to the email I sent yesterday in response to Kay Aiken's email, I see geothermal playing a small but noticeable part in the West, where geothermal heat is very common. Much of the state of Wyoming is hot enough. Everything around the Yellowstone caldera, several of the other calderas are, and the other thing is I noticed they were using gas instead of water because gas has.
You're talking about 2 or 3% of Wyoming.
I remember the numbers higher.
You're only talking about 2 or 3% of Wyoming. It's a northwest corner. The rest of the state is basically normal rock.
Well, no.
Sedimentary rock.
Clear. My roommate in college was a wellhead geologist that did lateral welling for natural gas. And he was in conversation with some of the people developing these deposits. And they said they could go down, I think 3 kilometers and they go lateral. And they were getting sufficient rock temperatures at that depth.
Okay, I'd like to, we're getting into the weeds. The general statement is no contradiction. This is a niche. It's going to affect 1 or 2 or 3% at most of the country's energy needs for electricity, and it's not a solution that compares to nuclear when it works. So
if you're trying to frame up the in this corner, in that corner, well,
yeah, right. That's right.
Yeah. The description of geothermal is woefully incomplete. Let me state that, first off, there are at least 3 completely different kinds. I think the one that most people have evoked in their mental imagery when they think of it, they're thinking of a magma type source. And literally, close to the surface, like a volcano type of situation. And that does happen. And it is very useful. And it is used around the world in a bunch of different places. But it's a very different thing from some other uses of what people call geothermal. And I wasn't even referring to the battery where you're putting heat in and taking it out. One of the things my father pointed out when I was young was how it doesn't take very much of a temperature differential to create an opportunity to pull out a lot of energy, although his target for discussion was the ocean, not land, where you just go through the thermocline of not all that far, and it's a liquid, so not as much of a problem. All I'm really trying to point out here is that the discussion we're having is quite limited from the broader scope of what geothermal could be. Furthermore, no one has yet mentioned, so I will now, that there have already been some well-funded efforts to investigate going right down to the core, pretty much anywhere on the crust. And is that something we can do? What are the feasibility and so forth? And the National Academy of Engineering has done some white paper stuff about this and so forth. And the general summary is it actually works, but we can do it. You're not going to get to the magma type of situation, but you get the similar as elsewhere where it's a lesser effect. And the problem is that people are just saying, yeah, but the economics. And I think that's probably where Tor is going to go on a different angle a little later. So I just wanted to state that it's a broader picture here than was framed already. And we should acknowledge we're only talking about this particular window that is being discussed here, which is, for example, whether you want to create steam or not, that type of thing. So I yield the floor. Thank you.
I'd like Michael to jump in because we're sort of asking him to pitch nuclear because he said he would. And would you please take off, Michael, with your opinion?
Well, starting, with the geothermal, I had a system at my home, and it was a well-designed system, but in the summer, during prolonged hot spells, the ground would get saturated and the system's efficiency declined significantly, and it was unable to keep up. And then there was an elementary school across the street from my office, and as part of the value engineering at the end of the project, when they realized they didn't have the budget to finish the school, they reduced the number of wells, I don't remember, by about 20%. And that field got saturated quickly. One of the problems was they didn't operate it correctly. They didn't do any that kind of night setback. So the well was trying to keep the school cool 24/7. If they could have, if they had operated it better, they would have had better results. They ended up adding a chiller to the system, and it worked fine after that. But that just underscores Paul's point that you can. It does require a lot of real estate to design a system properly, but they are extremely efficient. The house that we had the geothermal at, I was in general able to heat and cool it for 50 cents on the dollar compared to my prior conventional HVAC system. So it is efficient. It does have, in my opinion, it should be pushed as an energy efficiency measure in the appropriate areas. I think if you could get more contractors knowledgeable about the system, prices would come down. But it can be a very efficient way to heat and cool a home or a commercial building if you have the real estate.
Actually, Michael, I was asking you to, if you want to, push your opinion that if carbon is the problem, nuclear must be part of the solution. That's what I wanted you to develop your comment about.
Okay.
Why
Well,
is
I just wanted to underscore that the comments about geothermal were correct. So, at the end of the day, energy storage is unlikely to be sufficient to ride through Mother Nature's statistical anomalies. In January of 2025, the wind stopped blowing in England, primarily Scotland, and their 30 gigawatt system was producing 200 megawatts of wind energy for over a week. I don't know the exact number of days. It was an extended period of time. They had to fire up coal plants, gas plants that had been mothballed, because the wind just stopped blowing. Where I live in Tennessee, and with the push towards electrification, the load peaks at 5 o'clock in the morning in the winter when the sun's not shining, and Tennessee is a terrible place for wind. And at the end of the day, you need energy at 5 o'clock in the morning, and where are you going to get it? Batteries are only going to get you through so many winter days. We had a solar array at the power company that I worked at, and we'd go a week and it produced like 2 kilowatt hours because it was so cloudy in January. There is no substitute for steel on the ground, and whether it's gas, coal, or nuclear, you need something that you can turn a switch and you get electrons out of. And if you are of the mindset that carbon is a problem in the climate, then the only at-scale technology that exists today is nuclear. And it's just a reality. You can't run an electric system with solar, wind, and batteries that work 90% of the time. Because the 10% of the time it doesn't work, if you can't put electricity in people's homes, there's going to be civil unrest. Whether that's over, throwing the bums out at the next election, or people protesting in the streets because they're freezing to death. We as utilities have an obligation for public safety, and there is no at-scale carbon-free technology that can do that. And we can talk about all of the gee whiz technologies out there, and I'm going to tell you that Mother Nature is going to throw something at it that's going to cause it to fail. You need a robust generation system to get through.
More ideas. More ideas.
1 second, Richard. Tor has his hand up, and if you want to put your hand up.
And I don't have a way to raise my hand. I should have had my hand up the moment he started talking. No, look, my question. Look, hold on. I wasn't trying to get him to stop. I'm saying you've repeated that idea. More ideas, please. That was my question.
It's not really a question. It's more of a comment. I'm saying, you're basically saying good job or something?
No, well, I'm saying he's repeating the same argument, and I'm saying more ideas. Do you have more to your argument? Because we've heard the same exact articulation. At least that's how I felt.
Well, let's let Tor maybe has something to contribute. Go ahead, Tor.
Yeah, I agree with you on the line of reasoning that you want it local and you don't have a transmission grid so you could bring power out of state. You're right. You've got to have steel on the ground. However, the cost of ACC wiring, which is an innovation in Europe where they use graphene carbon fiber in their lines. They sag half as much. If you put grid scale batteries in both ends, you can get almost 6 times as much power through the same transmission line. So the cost of bringing in power to Tennessee and that region, whether you have a cold snap or you have a heat wave, any kind of sustained event, you could bring power in from the plains where the wind energy is very good. That's the wind belt. Or the Southwest, because we have California benefits from a long 1,000-mile interconnect from the Grand Coulee Dam in Washington State. It's high voltage DC and it goes down to Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the line loss on that is less than 15%.
I'm not going to argue with you. My contention is that drought, whether it be lack of water or lack of wind or lack of sun, is going to extend longer than any technically demonstrated battery system is capable of.
I would agree. There's a couple of designs that run for a month, but I largely agree with your premise. But to bring power in from out of state, because the second thing, one of the things we have a lot of in Washington State, and this goes back to Boeing and the hydro dams, which produce the cheapest power in the United States, is you got a lot of aluminum smelters.
Mm-hmm.
And when I've talked to them, they can profitably run a couple hours a day because it's just loading up a pot with aluminum oxide, putting the electrodes in, and just waiting till the power is cheap enough. They already do intermittent.
Except that aluminum smelting is one of the most energy inefficient types of smelting. It is very, very expensive energy-wise. It uses about 12 times the amount of energy per weight as steel to smelt.
But it's profitable to do. And
it's profitable to do only because there is a market for aluminum, not because it's necessarily better as a material.
Quality argument.
I'd like to add here that it just so happens that the NAE, of which I'm a member, National Academy of Engineering, has just put out a very erudite paper on this topic, exactly this topic, and they point out that, the push of the paper is to talk about the push to more recycling, because presently 1/3 of our aluminum, in particular, they picked on aluminum as an example, comes from recycled, and they talked about how the thermally conductive aluminum that is already extant as waste product, recycled, whatever you want to call it, is vastly easier to remelt and reuse as opposed to ore, and therefore want to reduce the amount of ore. However, they also point out in this same article, same white paper, which I can cite and provide to Myron, whatever, is that they talked about the absolutely vital role that aluminum has to play in our industrialized society. So if we want to give up on aluminum, we're giving up on industrialized society. Just saying. Also, since I have the opportunity, I'd like to mention that the potential of batteries has nowhere near been explored appropriately, mostly because of the profit motive, not because of the interest in a real functioning solution. There are thermal batteries, like putting it in the ground, heat in the ground. There are plenty of systems that that function perfectly quite well as wonderful battery systems that are technologically, snap your fingers, they're here today already, that just aren't being made because industry follows the money and also the attention as opposed to actually finding solutions that really work for us. Tor's comment about bringing power in from the outside is spot frickin' on. And we've already, so also a critical function we must focus on is every place, as much as possible, should have its own locally distributed energy resources, DERs, where local generation is providing a local product, so our transmission lines are free and available for those places that really need it when the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining.
Yeah,
This is
I
an
wanna cut you off.
important push. I'm sorry?
I want to cut you
Yeah,
off.
I'll yield the floor. Go ahead.
Okay, Dave wanted to say something.
Dave
Dave,
says feel free to introduce yourself as well. Thank you for
Dave,
joining the call.
introduce yourself and let us see your face.
Oh, I didn't realize my video was off.
Okay,
Yeah.
this is Dave Stetz is former chair of the Louisiana Sierra Club and head of the Sierra Club's electric vehicle program for a while.
Yeah, and back in 2007, I founded Richmond by Solar, and I was a NAPCEP certified solar guy and solar hot water. And in 2011, we funded Virginia Commonwealth University to build a heat store, which later got built, heated, a 1,000 square foot home for 3 years. And the students designed a heat store for one of the college dorms. The dorm was never built, but the design, we had a PhD running I forget whether it was a nuclear guy or something, for about 6 months doing software that we needed the whole idea, we had 2 loops. One, solar hot water coming out through 8 solar hot water panels, 4x8. They were producing close to 500-degree water year round. And that was going into a heat store that was built out of sand in the ground, insulated. And then there was a separate loop that took the heat out and heated the house with a radiant floor. And then we returned the water back to the heat store, and we used that to mix down the water that was in the heat store so that it would be usable in the house, because it was like 160 degrees in the heat store. And it was put in Solar Today, and it was titled, Could You Heat Your House with Solar Hot Water? And for the year. And of course, we got more comments than anything else the article they had run, because you can't do it unless you keep feeding more heat to it all year round. And the people that were talking about it said, well, you can't store enough heat in a snapshot, to heat a whole house for the winter, and you can't. But if you keep boosting it all year and you start it, you have to start it in the summer so that you capture all that heat. And the whole idea was mirrored after in Canada, they built, I think it was 52 wells that they put into rock, somewhere around Calgary, I think it was. And they had several hundred hot water solar panels heating the ground. It was not insulated. It was just going into the rock. And then they took that out and heated, I don't know, something like 50 homes or something in the area. And that got us to say, well, could we build a heat store out of something and do it here? And that worked for 3 years. And that got published and it was put in public domain. It was built originally to the Richmond had a public housing, and gas at 2011 was kind of expensive. So they wanted to come up with some other alternative. And that was what we designed. But by the time it was all done, the gas prices came back down and they just stuck with gas. But it did work, and it was documented and everything. So you can do it, but and they do it in Europe. They have huge thermal hot water tanks. I mean, they're the size of a baseball stadium that they use to pull out hot water for the housing. So there's ways to do it.
Okay, before you comment, Torrin, I don't want to cut you down, but there is part of the meeting announcement that talks about reaching stasis for the climate, which we haven't gotten close to talking about. Maybe, Tori, you can talk to him about that when you talk now. Go ahead, Tori.
Again, my TA is Ted Scambos, who's the lead researcher in Antarctica and did the paper on the Larsen B ice shelf breakup. They are openly predicting the collapse of Antarctica. And, by at least their latest estimates are higher, but the one they were sticking to is about 50 feet by 2100. Again, I did the work with Ted Scambos. We've discussed it when we meet. We just basically have a private language for it. There's probably a community of about 1,000 people that share this view. So
How do we stop it?
I didn't know we were going there, but I have deep knowledge about this, and all I will say is that in terms of global ice, so just a brief comment here. As part of my earth science work, I spent a lot of time with the global ice people, and it's a small community. Like Tor was saying, I'd be surprised if it was 1,000 people, maybe total. And these folks are studying terrestrially supported ice, as well as floating, like on the ocean. But it's the terrestrially supported ice that is most critical. And it is almost 100% ignored by damn near everybody. And I'm not exactly sure why. I'm glad to hear it being brought up in this context. The 50 some odd feet there. All right. So I could just spout off some numbers. We're about 186 feet from the highest the ocean level has ever been known to exist in the past. 186 feet. The height.
No, it's not.
yeah,
You've
if I
got,
may
you've got that 186 feet.
Yeah,
That 186 feet happens to be the level of the ocean if you melt off all the ice sheets. That's where that 186 feet comes from.
No, I don't think so, actually. But at any rate, okay, so look, either way, there's a lot of terrestrially supported ice, and there are feedback loops, and it's being ignored. I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
I want to make the case that about half of what's needed to stabilize our climate is the electrification of our world, and the other half is the withdrawal of CO2 from the atmosphere in the tune of around 1 trillion tons. And I will emphasize that China is the fastest electrifying country in the world, and they're doing real implementations of a lot of technology, not particularly new technology, but vast sodium-ion arrays, solar farms, wind farms, because they're desperate to get off Persian Gulf oil, which they don't have any control over there. So there was a war in the Middle East. There goes 60% of China's oil, which they're not happy about. So it's a mix of good news, bad news things, and I'm passionate for electrification of our society, but I'm fully aware that we've set up the same kind of climate loop feedback we saw in the Cretaceous.
Well, I want to emphasize what he said because I don't think people heard it. He said Cretaceous. I had private conversations with him. You may have put this in an email. He said that our carbon concentration is around 450. It needs to go down to 300 parts per million, or I think that's the right units. And when we had this last time, it was Cretaceous. There was virtually no ice on the planet. If we don't absorb 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide, and he says how, and Tor says how we couldn't do it, then we are pretty much doomed to 50, 100, 150, some number like that of sea level rise. which I believe would lose way more in trillions of dollars of infrastructure than it would cost to capture that carbon by using the method that Tor mentioned, by using various rocks that would absorb carbon dioxide. So, I mean, that's relevant to what we're talking about. If we're trying to reach stasis, how can we reach stasis? What is the stasis point we might reach? How quickly could we do it? And I think it's right for us to be focusing on encouraging our use of renewable energy and distributed energy resources so that we can get more bang for the buck, so that the energy we have is more usable without having tenuous transmission lines and so forth. But it isn't going to get there as far as I'm concerned. And even some of, like Dan told me, he grew up in Farmington, Massachusetts, which I don't believe is 150 feet above sea level, because it's right next to Boston. So if we want to save these major wonderful places in the world that I live and know and love, we've got to do something. We have to put that on our agenda. And that's what I think we're talking about. Are we dancing around that? Are we ignoring it? So I'd like to see if we could talk about that a little bit.
So
We're,
I would
wait,
introduce
wait,
a
Richard,
counterfactual.
Michael's talking. Wait a minute. Okay, Mike.
If the United States hadn't castrated its nuclear industry in the 60s, and instead of 18% of our energy last year being produced by nuclear, 50% of our energy was produced by nuclear, how much lower would the CO2 be today?
10 billion tons.
Because we would have exported that technology all
10
over
billion
the globe.
tons.
Okay, good number.
Well,
The problem is, it doesn't matter what technology is your favorite. If we're going to electrify the planet, we have to produce way more energy, and the current environmental approach is to fight everything. We had the war on coal, which was largely won. We immediately started the war on gas. And as soon as the wind industry took off, we started a war on wind, because we don't want wind. We don't want turbines where we, in our visual field. And if, if the answer is long transmission lines, the environmental activists are going to fight the transmission lines tooth and nail. At the end of the day, we have to have practical solutions. It's an all of the above. And if you believe that carbon is the problem and you want to electrify every aspect of modern life, you need way more energy than we're talking about today. And the only way to get there at scale that's been demonstrated commercially, which is the operative words here, commercial demonstration, is nuclear power plants. And these
Amen.
new small
I have a simple question. I have a simple.
Beth speaking, please.
Richard, let Michael finish.
These small nuclear reactors that can be turned out in a manufacturing plant where they're all the same. I mean, you think about it, every aircraft carrier, every nuclear submarine, nuclear can be built in a highly repetitive process where all the units are identical, and the price curve will drop just like it dropped on wind turbines. And it's carbon free, and you can flip a switch and turn it on. And if we're going to electrify everything, it's got to be a significant part of the answer.
I profoundly disagree.
I'm surprised.
And I do, however, think nuclear has one particular place, one very specific place, which is it is probably the only ready-to-hand technology we've got that can help eliminate carbon sources that are presently being used to for smelting of our metals. And that is a use case.
Don't
I
forget
can-
Las Vegas.
Well, lost wages is its own problem. Look, I'm just
Las
trying to
Vegas.
say,
Las Vegas.
I know that's what he meant.
Yeah.
Though.
Yeah. I also, when I hear people, I mean, I was just shocked to have heard the assault on everything, starting with coal, like stopping burning coal was a bad thing. Like shifting
You're a
away
coal miner,
from,
it is.
you know, those people should have been handed a better economic deal.
They
That is
weren't.
a good
They weren't.
argument.
Live in the real world.
Yeah, look, the question here about living in the real world,
We gave
sounds,
them Oxycontin.
it sounds to me like the assertion being made about living in the real world is we shouldn't know what our goals ought to be, because that's what this dialogue is about. There's nobody here who's a senator sitting on a major committee. There's nobody, etc. Okay? So if we're going to shoot for the moon and at least try to have the right goals, it should be abundantly clear that adding more carbon is exactly the wrong thing. And that doesn't mean that everything that's being done to electrify and greenify the world is really helping. Some things are not, because the world is complex. But at least we should understand the goal is to stop putting carbon in the atmosphere so that we can begin to really turn it around and start removing it. And we're talking gigatons a year of carbon here. So, you know, billion tons, yeah, we're talking so many, Yoda tons or
If you're
something.
going to do that, you need to build nuclear power plants, period.
No, what we need to do is start sequestering the carbon that's out there via other means.
Which requires energy, which you can get from a nuclear power plant.
Have you really personally had any real upfront and close experience with this fissile material and this nuclear stuff? Because I have, and I'm telling you, it's pretty deadly stuff. And the nuclear industry,
and it's being, and France has been using it for 40, 50 years, and they probably have a much smaller per capita carbon footprint than the United States, because they use the technology in a way that makes sense.
Richard, you were in Japan for the Fukushima reactor meltdown, weren't you?
Wait.
Yeah, that's right. I was. Yes,
some people are polite enough to raise their hand.
I'm sorry, I was just
I want Tor to say something.
Brendan, what Brendan was saying was pointing out, he remembered correctly, that I personally have ingested a chunk of cesium from Fukushima. Yeah, documented by my doctors. There's a paper about it. Yeah, threatened my personal life. So it's, on the other hand,
and how many people die from the exhaust from tailpipes?
Yeah,
die in car wrecks.
You know,
nuclear energy is safe. There are problems.
The correct response to the question is we didn't know any better when we started going down that path. We do know better with nuclear. That's the correct answer. When we started.
I want to turn to Paul, who's raising his hand, and then Tor.
I want Tor to have a chance to speak. Just want to say one thing. I've been an anti-nuclear activist most of my life. I think that Michael has an inappropriate, narrow view about how safe it is. I think it is way more dangerous, but I think even if it's 10 times as dangerous as I think it is, that doesn't, in my opinion, negate Michael's argument, because the downside of fossil fuel in its destruction to the planet dwarfs the amount of deaths coming from nuclear in any case. So I don't think it matters whether he's right or I'm right, and I might be saying 100 times more, 1,000 times more than him. That still pales in comparison to the climate destruction that we're trying to avoid. So go ahead, Tor, why don't you comment?
I just want to emphasize there's lots of very radioactive sites just naturally in Utah and other places in Colorado. I mean, we got our Geiger counter to sing in some of the fissures. I mean, it's a geologic thing.
But
I mean,
that's actually, that's taking us off in the wrong direction.
no,
No,
no, it's entirely. I believe nuclear in a modern incarnation is safe, and it's a waste of time to talk about Fukushima or Chernobyl because these were flawed reactor designs run by, you know, irresponsible people. I don't want to get on these side effects. I want to talk about what's current technology that we would
I want
actually.
to make sure Paul has a chance to speak. He had his hand raised earlier on the same
Yeah.
on that same topic. Before
There is, I fundamentally agree that in the shorter term, building a few more nuclear power plants is probably worthwhile. Also, shutting down the Bitcoin business, which is using up a huge amount of energy and producing a lot of CO2. But anyway, but there is having been a uranium exploration geologist in Vermont, of all places, the summer before 3 Mile Island. And by the way, we found a world-class uranium deposit in Vermont, which will not be exploited as long as Vermont is politically the way that it is today, and has been ever since we found it back in '78. So it's been a few years. And uranium isn't all that dangerous, having held chunks of uranium oxide, crystals of uranium oxide that were 4 inches across, or 4 centimeters across, not 4 inches, 4 centimeters across, and dealt with veins that were 2 centimeters wide of pure uranium oxide. I mean, it's warm. Yes, it's radioactive, but it isn't that dangerous compared to lots of other things, such as the amount of uranium that gets kicked out by a coal-fired power plant is huge compared to anything that you are dealing with normally. By the way, just one note back about 10 steps or 20 steps in our conversation here. Back in 1984, when RCRA was passed, Resource Conservation Recovery Act, and was signed by Ronald Reagan, of all people, 3 days after he was reelected president. He waited to sign it until after the election.
That sounds like
it was mandated that every large institution in every city of more than 10,000 people had to recycle 80% of their aluminum cans. No institution has ever achieved that, but that was mandated at that time. If we were recycling 80% of our aluminum cans, we would be a long ways farther down the road. But we have already found that there isn't the political will to impose the penalties that were actually specified back in 1984.
I just want to point out, we have 3 minutes left. I want everyone to take 30 seconds, make a closing comment, because we don't go past 9 o'clock if we can help it. You go first, Tor.
I'm done.
Yes, I just want to emphasize my entire logic works on what things cost. What is the cost benefit analysis? I agree the nuclear is safe. We've got nuclear reactors all over the Navy. They've never had a problem. I think it's foolish to say this is not going to be acceptable or that's going to be acceptable. But if you look at the lowest cost, again, solar produces power at about 1 cent a kilowatt hour. It's just underneath everybody. I look at sodium-ion batteries and the development and CATL and BYD. They're dropping the price of batteries around 15% per year. At some point, putting up grid scale batteries all over the place, and Wall Street's all over this. They get about a 20% rate of return.
Okay, somebody else goes next. Who wants to talk next?
Sure, I'll just go very briefly. I want to thank Paul Washington and Michael Watson for their first time showing up to our group. And then Myron, I'm also going to send you an email along with Dr. Saeed with an edit of the and comments from editors for that one environmental book chapter. I'll send it in an email later tonight.
Okay,
Next, go ahead, Richard.
Right. I'll be very brief. I just want to point out that we have the political will. It's being ignored. We've had a supermajority of the population who's wanted serious action on this stuff for decades. And the problem is that we don't have a democracy. I'll just end it right there.
Oh, I'd like to make the main point that I think ProRate as a group believes. The way to solve the climate problem is at a profit, not at a cost. We have to create mechanisms to generate these consequences by paying people to do the right thing. For example, we let people buy electricity when it's cheap and sell them when it's more expensive. And that automatically causes people to buy batteries, and everybody's laughing all the way to the bank. And these various technologies talking about have to be tied into a mechanism where people make a profit. We're not going to get them to do it because of religion, not because of their ethics, not for any other reason. There's only one green that matters, and it's got a dollar bill behind it. Next comment.
Hallelujah.
Anyone else want to comment? Please.
Yeah, I'll just say, I appreciate everyone's opinions and expertise. As a global citizen, I am counting on all of you guys, all the scientists, to come up with a new technology, whether it's fusion or using the constant forces of the ocean and gravity, or hydrogen, or whatever it is that we can come up with as using science to solve the problem, because we are going to continue to use more electricity as a planet. It's amazing how much more efficient things have gotten, but we've gotten more and more and more of those efficient things around the planet. If you look at the carbon output, per country, France is right up there with everybody else, even with nuclear, per capita. And I'm a like Myron and Richard, I'm an anti-nuclear person just because the waste is the dirtiest, longest lasting stuff. And I don't feel like it's good for our planet. But I also am a practical person and see that there is value in using nuclear electricity until we can generate other ways of creating electricity more safely.
Okay, Dave, you want to say something to top this off? No. Christopher.
Paul or Michael or Chris.
Christopher, would you like to say something?
Okay, so my name's Christopher Faust, and I'm a nuclear engineer. I served for 8 years on intercontinental ballistic missile submarines as a nuclear engineer. And I've been contemplating the questions we're discussing tonight for 25 years at a lot deeper depth than what you guys are talking about. It kind of reminded me nuns about talking about sex. Okay. I mean, you guys have really not grasped the magnitude of the problem. And you talk about, well, sequestering 1 trillion tons of carbon. Sure, that'll do. That's great. At what, $550 a ton? That's more than all the combined real estate in the United States.
Tor thinks you can do it at $30 a ton.
Okay. So it's $30 trillion to a nation that's $37 trillion in debt and giving billionaires tax cuts. I mean, I'm telling you, okay, the paradigm that you're going down of energy efficiency and reclamating the environment, it's just dribble. It ain't gonna happen.
Yeah,
You gotta think about creating mechanisms that ultimately utilize the natural environment, that eliminates the need 40% across the board. And you do that by taking what Myron's saying right now and encouraging them to invest in these new technologies that displace, not satisfy the need of, but displace the energy they're consuming now at a profit to the guy that owns the building.
Right, right.
That's what's got to happen. And this nuclear bad, nuclear good, every nuclear power plant that's operating today is operating at 100% capacity based upon shutting down for maintenance and what like that. It's a reliable, durable source of energy. We put a license on it for 30 years, but we designed them for 75. And they got to be part of our mix to empower the next level of technology, to displace the need, not satisfy it. Because what you're trying to do is what's wrong. That's all I got, Myron.
All right, well, I'd like to close at 9. We're 5 minutes late, so anyone that has a burning comment, raise your hand now, or we can meet again next week and continue this. And I really appreciate everyone's contribution. Hope you found this.
Can you back announce the guy who just spoke, Chris somebody? Yeah?
That was Christopher Faust.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind chatting with you later.
Well, I'll give you guys contact information. I'll be happy to send it to you. Anyway,
All
thank you guys for participating. Maybe we do this every Monday night, and I try to create a provocative subject, and we got a really good meeting tonight. Thank you guys for participating.
thank
Good
you.
night.